might cost about what a really nice German car costs by the time you put it in your home.
And that's why we see them in commercial construction. We don't really in residential. Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'd rather buy an expensive German car than a freaking ERV. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, a regular discussion about building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. Today I'm joined by Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hi.
Contributing Editor Ian Schwant.
Hello.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it's great to see you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Mike, it seems like we just did this.
Shh, don't give too many people a peek behind the curtain there.
For those of you who are wondering, we recorded yesterday too, so it's good to see you again.
Yeah, we could actually do like 3 or 4 of these back to back and then sprinkle them over the course of a month, and I don't think anybody know the difference.
Hey, that's how I do Pro Talks. Don't give up the secrets.
I've often talked about that. Folks listening, what prevents that oftentimes is we don't get enough questions to field that many shows in a row. And, I think the show is better when we have real questions instead of making them up. So if you got one or a comment, please send it in. We always love hearing from you.
Yeah, and we like the timely comments too, so they're not, delayed weeks or months behind where we've actually had an episode, so people can have a little recollection of,
what we talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you really make up questions, Patrick?
What I do is write my own questions.
How many aliases do you have?
Yeah. I bet you'd come up with some pretty good aliases, Patrick. I think you'd do better than Mitt Romney's Pierre Delecto alias that he was using for Twitter. I bet you could.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Well, to prevent that, folks, why don't you write in with your questions and it'll all work out better for everybody. Ian, you and your wife have been stupidly busy, it would seem to me.
Yeah, we planted 300 dahlia tubers over Memorial Day weekend, and then 400 feet of veg rows that we planted, set up the whole irrigation system, and I built these, probably overly complex for what they needed to be, modular trellises. So I took 4x4s of pressure treated, sunk them into pots that she wasn't using anymore, filled them with concrete, and then drilled some holes in them. And I have 1/2-inch rebar going between the posts for her to wire up her tomato plants and dahlias. I made about, maybe 200 feet of them. And I think I need another 200 or 300 feet of them. So
how can someone eat this many vegetables?
Yeah, I don't really know. I'm gonna find out.
You know what it reminded me of, Ian, is a winery. It was on the scale of a winery is how I would describe it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little insane. The garden is about 2/3 of an acre, plus the plantings that we did on the back side of the house, so to speak. We're really chewing up the mulch, keeping the mulch industry alive in Dodge County.
You mentioned irrigation. You're on a well. Is that a worry? Do you get enough rain to recharge your well and water your garden?
Yeah. We're pretty water rich here in the upper Midwest, as opposed to what Mike and I were talking about with some of the things going on and limiting construction in the state of Arizona. So my well is 250 feet deep, which is actually twice the depth of the wells around me. So for whatever reason, I'm sitting on more limestone and more rock than the rest of my near neighbors who have wells that are 100 feet deep.
Mike, you want to briefly explain what Ian was talking about with limiting development in the Southwest?
Well, it was something that Ian brought up, so he knows. He read about
Oh,
something recently.
Yeah, yesterday I saw an article pop up about the city of Phoenix, or maybe it was the state of Arizona, was going to start limiting permits for new builds around Phoenix due to the water supply.
and what I took away from that was that they don't even have enough water to supply the homes that they've permitted that are yet to be built.
Correct.
Yeah, man.
Correct.
I was driving through that area from Phoenix down to Tucson about a month and a half ago, where you can just see it. It's just an inconceivable number of acres that are just kind of in the platting stage where they're starting to put the roads in, and it's like as far as the eye can see in three directions. So yeah,
What about
it's,
schools and stuff, Mike? What the heck do they do about that?
with what?
Was with schools, like how do they like have enough classroom space?
I don't know how they do it there in Arizona. I know when they were doing a lot of building nearby my in-laws' house in Florida, the developer would have to have a whole master plan that included all of the retail shopping areas that would be needed, as well as put aside land for the public facilities development, be it a sewer treatment plant, water pumps, and schools and things like that, and even county offices for permitting and those kind of things, clerks' offices.
Interesting. So we just talked yesterday. Have you done anything since then that's worth talking about?
I I have near my garden, which is not nearly as large as Ian's garden. I thought I had my neighbors all think I'm a farmer because I've got like a 100 by 100 size, 100 foot by maybe 200 foot size garden, and they all consider me a farmer for that. So it's
All
not
the
on.
farmers consider us hobbyists and tinkerers with our little two
Oh, that's
thirds
so.
of an acre.
It's the scale is just different.
Yep.
So next to one corner of my garden, there are some large ash trees which I've been watching die over the last 4 or 5 years due to the emerald ash borer, and I haven't seen any of the little insects, the little green insects on the trees, but I started noticing the bark coming loose, and then this year leaves did not come out on two of
Mm.
the trees, so I dropped three. They're probably 70-foot tall trees with about a base of about maybe 30, 32 inches. So
Oh
brought
wow,
those
that's a big
down
tree.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are big. And I wish the
So
wood was, I should have dropped them before they got so far along in their death, because I could have, they were perfectly straight trunks. I could have brought them to a local mill and had them milled up into some wood that I could probably find somebody that could use it.
it makes pretty good firewood.
Yeah, that's what it'll become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff, similarly, have you worked on your railing since yesterday
No, I actually mowed the lawn, which I didn't do over the weekend because I was working on the railing. So,
on the rail? Okay. One quick question, Mike. How big is your chainsaw to cut a tree that big? That's a pretty big trunk.
I considered doing it with my 14-inch Milwaukee battery operated to see how that would
Nice.
do. I have a 24-inch bar, which, you go in from one side, you go in from the other.
Yeah.
Plus, I didn't cut it right at the base. I cut it up about 4 feet. So it was only about maybe 28 inches or so. So, yeah, it makes it.
That's scary work, right?
I cable them. I put two cables. I put a 40-foot, well, not a 40. I go up about 26 feet up the tree with a ladder, and then I put a chain around it, and then I run two cables at about maybe 20 to 30 degrees out to bait trunks of adjacent trees, like maybe 40, 50 feet away. And then I put some hand winches on that to put some tension on. Then I make them fall exactly where I want them. That way, there's very little risk when you do it that way.
Still scary. Just crazy heavy things that I
I'll send
think
you.
you've all
I'll,
heard me say that I watch YouTube videos of tree felling fails, and it's boy, there's a lot of them.
I'll send you a video I'm cranking on the winch in one hand, and I got my phone in the other, taking a video of it coming down.
Cool. Yeah, please. You guys may have seen my table I modified ahead of the show. I sent a photo to y'all, and the casters. Well, let's just say I might have overdid it with the casters. This is a warning to folks listening to the show. Like, don't go shopping on Amazon after 3 or 4 beers on a Friday night, because you kind of might end up with something that you didn't really understand what you were buying. But boy, they're beautiful. They're cast iron casters that I put on a base under my table in the barn that came from my wife's family. That's probably from the machine age. And if you look at an old Sears catalog, you can actually find this table in there. And it's not worth anything, but it's just cool, and she loves it. So it's too low to work at. So I made this base that you could set it on and roll it around. And then if you want to use it as a dining table, you can just lift it off the base, and it functions as normal. So
What's on
I don't know.
What's on top of the table? It looks like a piece of coil stock, some aluminum.
It's a piece of pleather, Mike.
Okay.
Leather. I
Did you
thought
guys
maybe
know
you were
that?
going to put your anvil on it and roll it around, roll it around the barn.
I think you totally could. I don't know what I was thinking I was going to be doing at this table, but I wanted the height of these giant casters. What I didn't imagine is they would also be so impossibly heavy duty. I think they have like a 1,200-pound capacity or something.
Yeah, they could do the anvil.
No problem.
Well, thank you, all of you listeners who wrote into the podcast email box with your comments and questions once again. This comes from Richard. He says, while there may be a real need to increase the electric grid capacity in the next 10 to 20 years, it's not as hard as duplicating 100 years of past construction. First, because Westinghouse won over Edison, distribution can add capacity by simply increasing the voltage on existing cables. Higher voltage at the same amps equals higher power. No wire size change are needed. It does require changing transformers or their taps, which is relatively easy. Second, existing right-of-way and towers can add additional lines. More difficult, but it eliminates the right-of-way concerns. Adding generation is the real challenge, especially when coal and nuclear are in the crosshairs of some. However, wind and grid-tied solar is clean and already incentivized, as are energy conservation measures. Some pie-in-the-sky electrification won't happen as long as natural gas and affordable gasoline remain. Furnaces remain for many, as will gas cars. Well, yeah, I think we're talking about a decades-long transition. Right.
I think you had some good points there, but I would also add the resiliency of our electrical grid is not really up to snuff when you're talking about total electrification of homes. When I lived in Dutchess County, New York, a pretty nondescript summer storm or spring storm could knock power out for 10 or 11 days, let alone any of the superstorms. And it was because the grid was so antiquated and went through very difficult to reach areas.
I would also add that people don't want to pay their current electric bills. What the heck
Right.
is this going to cost utility payers, right?
Yep.
Yeah, somebody has to pay for it.
Richard also wrote in, the issue with battery adapters is the lack of standardization of the safety communication protocol between the tool and lithium battery. The anything goes strategy will have earlier consequences here. While not a hot button issue, I tend to agree with a recent comment concerning power tool battery standardization. Suggesting standardization would limit innovation seems unlikely, since they all perform the same functions, provide voltage, and ensure safety through a communication channel to the tool. The tool has the controller and the motors where the innovation occurs, primarily using permanent magnet inverter-driven motors, marketed as brushless. Better battery chemistry and manufacturing techniques allow more amp hours, which provides more runtime and instantaneous amp sourcing, but those battery improvements are independent of the connector and safety interface. Maintaining proprietary batteries ensure non-standardization of the physical layout and tends to push a user to stay within a brand rather than shuffle multiple chargers and excessive numbers of batteries to the worksite. An argument could be made that the current situation could discourage a user from using a better tool from another manufacturer. Well, I think that's totally true. If you're on someone's platform and you need their jigsaw, you're not going to switch brands to buy a better one. I believe power tool batteries could be standardized from a connector and safety perspective while still allowing increased performance to evolve, to say nothing about the impact increased competition would have on battery prices. Probably won't happen until a lithium battery causes a significant fire because of lack of standardization. Do you guys think Richard's maybe an engineer?
For sure.
Richard, thanks for writing in.
I did just recently do a pro talk with two engineers from Milwaukee Tool that I think maybe came out recently or has already come out by the time this
week, I
podcast
think.
airs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we got into some of the battery chemistry and technology and why it's important to manufacturers to develop their own platform of batteries, which thought it was interesting to get their reasoning behind it from the tool manufacturer standpoint.
I think a skeptic would say, of course, Milwaukee's going to say that. Ian, did they have good rationale for why manufacturers should, stick to their own stuff?
My takeaway was that, to Richard's point about the tools doing the same function, is correct for tools that do the same function. But when you're talking about some of the tools that Milwaukee has been putting out lately that replace gas-driven, heavy industrial level construction tools like concrete finishers, large saws for cutting concrete, I think it'd be very difficult to get that level of innovation off of a standardized battery platform.
Did I hear that right? Concrete finishers, so whirlybirds are now being powered with batteries?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Have you seen one of these power trials?
I haven't seen one in action. I saw the demo that they turned me on to before the podcast, and it's pretty interesting. They don't have a ton of runtime, but when you think about it, if you're invested in their platform because you have the concrete cutting tools, they have a compaction walk behind tool that runs off of that battery platform as well. So if you're heavily invested in that and you don't want to be using gas to power that stuff, you're going to end up with a few of those very large, very expensive batteries. So
I would
15-minute
say too
runtime isn't an issue.
That sometimes you can't run gas equipment if you're indoors, or you shouldn't. So.
Did you ever think you'd see this kind of battery-powered tools, Mike, when they first came out?
I had an online discussion with somebody last week about the original battery tools. We got the 7.2 and the 9-volt stick battery tools.
Battery about as long as my forearm.
Yeah, the old Milwaukee's. And I still
Makita.
have a couple of those. You're right. I had Makita, and that color green, which is that teal green, which is still in my toolkit. It's like I can't throw those old tools away, even though I don't use them, because I think they're going to become classics. You'll find them on the wall of a restaurant, this antique, where you see all the other antique tools.
Those were an incredible innovation, though. I think you'd agree. They seem antiquated now, but my God, it was incredible. Yeah.
And what we paid for them at the time was like a week's pay to get one of those. It were like $300 a piece. And, this is going back to the early 80s, and that's what we were earning for a week's pay on Yeah. And you were willing to shell it out because of the benefits.
Hugely versatile and useful thing, right? Suddenly you could use screws to put things together, right? That was the huge change, right?
Yeah.
People listening is like, well, these guys are so old.
Those darn slotted screws that we were using up until then, they don't work really good with a drill driver.
If y'all have photos of your vintage cordless tools, I'd love to see them, because I sure used that stuff, and gosh, it was wonderful. I remember when the first keyless chucks came out. That was another huge change.
Mike, I think you should get a bunch of old New England carpenters together, and you guys can all build something with your old Makita tools like the old tractor guys do by me. Bring the old tractors out and rake some hay with it. Build a little park bench somewhere with your old Makita stuff.
That's hilarious.
Yep. That would be funny. We just have to find batteries that'll last more than 5
Right.
minutes.
Show up at show up at Mason's next touch a trade with all those old Makita tools.
What is
It'll
this?
it'll go with Cam. Cam is gonna have to put an
Yep.
addition for the original the original battery tools. Yeah.
It still very much excites people on my Facebook feed to find old porta-planes, these Porter
Yep.
cable, especially for doors. It's the tool you need, and it hasn't been in production, I think, for at least 20 years. But super heavy-duty aluminum-bodied power plane, and if you find one, buy it because they're
Especially if you find any new old stock of the spiral cutter head that came on those. I would imagine that would really be something to find.
yeah, because the replacements are hundreds of dollars, or and they're always beat the heck on the tools. This is already fun, gentlemen. Thank you. Oh my gosh! So we have Lisa on the line here, and Ian has been having a long conversation via email with Lisa, so he's going to have lots of details to fill us in. But I'm going to start by reading her email, which is pretty good. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! What would I do if I had not subscribed to FHB and Fine Home and stumbled upon the Fine Homebuilding podcast? I started with JLC but needed more. I'm responsible for all aspects of my/our forever home to be built on 2.3 acres, which has been purchased, and the plan is for a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. At 62 and a retired nurse, I am overwhelmed by the decisions I have to quickly make. I/we, he still works and has no time, have so many questions. Having spent my sleeping hours listening to your podcast, I have yet to hear about steel siding, pros and cons. Does it need to be insulated? Should I consider it? What's appropriate for window choices for a new build? Most of my companies are replacement. Why does a 2,300 square foot house cost $800,000 to build in 2023? Efficient green heating options appear to be out of the budget. What does the typical homeowner do to stay within the constraints of a modern budget? Homes in the East/New England area seem to be way ahead of the Midwest in terms of having more affordable, sustainable options. That I am going to question. Homes go up fast. In what order would you spend your money for a new build? We planned for a post and beam construction MCM ranch with basement. Now I'm told by the builder that I have to make alternative decisions because my steel beams, windows, and siding choices are too expensive. Heck, I take notes in my sleep and choose my option based on your podcast. Maybe I should sleep instead. Thanks for any suggestions. Lisa, I have an attached images of my design scheme and layout. Beautiful home. Boy, there's a lot to unpack here. Yeah. Go ahead, Ian. I guess you know more about this than any of us.
Yeah, I had a couple of emails back and forth with her. She didn't get a reply to my last one where I asked her how far along her construction documents were. But I think on the specific questions that she asked, the steel siding, I think it's great. My parents have had it on their house for, I don't know, closing in on 20 years. Still looks really good, easy to clean, maintain. I don't think it needs to be insulated. I can't imagine that the little glued on EPS on the back side of it does much good. I tried to get some information from Lisa about what level of design the architect that she was working with had provided, or if she was relying more on the GC to figure this all out for her, if the designer just gave her that general mid-century modern design, but I didn't get any clear answers back on that in a couple of emails that she and I had.
What do you think the right model is? Should the designer be, designing to her budget, or does the GC have to figure that out after the fact, like is always the case?
I think it's really challenging. I told her a little bit about the house that we just broke ground on recently, and these clients came to us with a budget very similar to her stated budget. What she said to me in the email was a little bit below where they're going to end up. And this house is 1.2, and by the time we're done with it, it probably should have been 1.4 or 1.5 with the amount of finishes and work and other things that it's going to take and the management. Uh, in my mind, a lot of this comes down to that the average consumer, even the well-educated consumer, doesn't really know how to purchase from people like myself or Mike or Mike's brother or some of the other listeners to the program.
What do you mean by that, Ian? It's just like they have no idea what stuff costs, I'm guessing is what you're trying to say.
They don't know what stuff costs, but more importantly, they don't know what they need to bring to us. So if you just hire a designer for your house, which can be totally fine, and they just come up with the aesthetic design of the home, someone still has to come up with the mechanicals. And if you have ideas like you want to be sustainable and you want to have green energy, that's great, but those are a little bit more buzzwordy. There isn't a green HVAC spec that your GC can yank off the shelf and go, okay, they said green, so yeah, we'll do that instead of a gas furnace. It doesn't exist. It's not like options on a car where you go in and you want leather seats, so that means you get heated seats too, whether you want them or not, because it's packaged together. It's you have to bring such a high level of information to a contractor nowadays, especially for a very high-end custom job, that even not having a very small amount of that information is going to cause your costs to explode, because somebody has to figure out how these systems tie together. And as these homes get more and more complex, that level of information really needs to be provided to the person building it.
Mm-hmm. So, Ian, with your company, are you more of a design build firm where,
Correct.
okay, so
Yeah.
so when a client comes in, they're being brought through a whole program of a whole lot of questions so that
Yes.
the design team is teasing out a lot of that information, and so they're taking the budget into consideration and the design goals for the client, and then making sure that at the end, when it gets to your desk, that it's probably going to be able to be costed out
Yep.
on target, versus somebody like Lisa, who's probably working with a designer separate from the builder. There is that mismatch. You're not, because
Yeah.
the designer is probably not thinking of going through all that questioning process, because they're not going to be responsible for the cost of the project. And then the builder
Right.
doesn't have all the information that they need. Yeah. So it makes a
Right.
lot of
Any pros or listening to this show will tell you that architects often design things that can't be built for the client's budget, and I hear that all the time. And Ian, you caution Lisa about what most people's first response would be, which would be to find a cheaper builder to
Yep.
try and get the thing built that they want. And I think folks would be that's a reasonable thing to do, right?
Right. Yeah. I got a little bit of information from her that some other builders had given her costs more along the lines of the house that we're building. And I feel like if 3 or 4 reputable builders tell you your house is 1.2 and then somebody else says, nah, it's 700, we can do it for that, there's probably something wrong with the guy that said 700,000. Maybe he can do it for that, but he's going to drop it down to his standard spec, going to disregard some of the things that you want. It may aesthetically look like what your designer did, but it might not have some of the other built-in qualities to it that you're looking for.
And it might also be the different value engineering that different builders are doing. I
Yep.
know with a lot of builders around here, they're just going to throw a big number at it, and they figure, yep, no matter what goes into this house, what they want
I'm
for a
covered.
kitchen, what they want for the flooring, we're covered. Yeah, what they want
Yep.
for the garage door, that frosted glass garage door that they have, that she has in the rendering. So versus the other builder might say, yeah, I know I can shave a lot out of this house by value engineering it. So that's where a design build firm is building that right into the process, because they're
Right.
value engineering it all the way through, rather than at this point shopping the plans around.
Did you
So
look at this house,
to
Jeff?
Mike's,
Did you look at this house, Jeff? Did you see this? What this?
I did, yeah.
What do you think that would sell for around here?
2.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an expensive home. It's beautiful. It's got custom details. It's complicated to build because of the way it's constructed. You're shaking your head, Mike.
When I look at it, I go, I could value engineer that thing, and it would still look very close to what it looks like now, and do it on a pretty good tighter budget than what
You
the
better be
numbers.
careful. You're going to be building this house.
I'm not moving out there. Sure. Well,
To Mike's earlier point, the amount of budgeting that I do for large projects, we have a multi-phased design process that starts off with a sales process that gets them into the design group's workflow. I do at least one budget before they sign a design agreement with us, typically in schematic design in the first initial design phase. I'll do up to 3 or 4 budgets based on different designs and different levels of value engineering. And then we'll do a budget check-in during design development in case anything's changed, and then the final contract budget. So I'm looking at the same project 6 or 7 times and tweaking the pricing for it along the way to give the client a clear view of what all these different changes and decisions they're making or are thinking about making, what they do to the cost.
How do you guys get paid for all that time, Ian? You might not even get this client, right? Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, but the idea is that by the time we get them to sign off on a schematic design, they're also signing off on the budget. So they're saying that we are committing to building this project in pretty close to the way it's designed, and we are willing to spend this amount of money. So that's the point of no return for us. And we did have another new house drop out of our design queue because we got them to the end of SD, and they were not going to get what they wanted for what they were able to pay. And they said, we just can't do this right now. We need to reevaluate our needs, and we're sorry we've took up this amount of your time. Here's the money we owe you for this amount of work. And we moved on, which it's frustrating. And it's very frustrating for all of my peers when they go through that. But you do have to keep in mind that that's the process. The process is designed to weed that person out at the end of the schematic design phase.
All great questions.
And you're being paid, your firm's
Right.
being paid. And
Correct.
Rick Arnold and I, when we were running our business full tilt back in the early 90s, mid 90s, we would do a similar thing, working. Either we would be doing the design, or we'd have an architect designer we're working with, but we would be charging fees along the way, and we had a whole schedule. And a lot of people like that because it's like they're taking steps in rather than jumping in with 2 feet. And jumping in with 2 feet to me is you having somebody you're spending a lot of money to have designed the house, an architect, only later to find out that it's just completely out of your budget.
One final thought here, Lisa, is that you can get an $800,000 house in Newtown, but what it looks like is a box. It's got 4 walls, symmetrical windows on the front, and a truss roof, and that costs $800,000. And it's probably got vinyl shutters on it for a little interest, and that's what you get, right?
Yep.
And in the subdivisions in this area, which Lisa's house is, within a 2-hour drive of where I live, but most of the subdivisions built by the big nationwide builders, for $650,000, you're getting a 2,000 square foot vinyl sided, vinyl windowed, square, 2-story fake colonial on,
A quarter acre.
1/3 of an acre.
Yeah.
And that's what you're getting for that. And I've started telling people when they ask me about new house prices, I tell them drive through one of the big boy subdivisions, find a house you like, find what the price is, and times it by 2.5. And that's what a custom house of that type is going to cost you.
What do you call this theorem or formula, Ian?
The bitter truth. We as custom builders, and Mike knows this, we have no economy of scale to what we do in the custom world. It's every day is something totally bespoke and new, probably using techniques that have evolved from other new projects, but it's not like building an entire subdivision of houses where it's just your framers go through, then your siding guys go through, and your roofing guys go through, and they do 100 houses, and you get massive economy of scale out of that. All the stuff is the same. I like to tell people that when I worked for one of these home builders as a finisher, I got to the point where I'd trim the same house so many times I could set up in the master bedroom and go, that piece of base is going to be 13'1". That piece of base is going to be 8 foot. That piece of base is going to be 7 foot. And they're all the same.
Did you like not having to think about that work, or was it drudgery?
It was awesome for 2 years. And then it kind of started to get a little boring after that. But
well, I hope we hear more from Lisa, because I'd like to know how she resolves this, because I think it is a super common scenario, and I think folks listening this would agree.
I think it's all about asking the right questions of the right people at the right time.
Easier said than done.
Yep.
Yeah, especially if this is your first, new home build, custom home build, right? I think if you did 2 or 3, you'd start to, figure it out.
This would make a good case study to follow Lisa all the way through, because there are a lot of people that run into the same situation, and that if we commented on it over the course of a number of podcasts, it would be good to kind of consolidate that information so to make it a little guide for folks on how to avoid the pitfalls of having a custom house designed and built and value engineered along the process.
I had a thought. So what you do is you shrink the house by 2/3 in every dimension. Doesn't work, does it, Mike?
But it doesn't work that way.
I know.
As you condense it down, you're not going to get the economy of scale. You could turn that. What is it? A 2,300 square foot house or so? I think she had. Yeah. You could make that a 3,000 square foot house for
only a little more money.
$dollars a square foot. Really. Yeah. Because of all there is an economy of scale in just the size of it that comes. It does come into play.
You'd have to make it the size of a treehouse to do what I'm talking about, to actually save any money, right?
Barbie would love it, though.
You can put wheels on it and tow it behind your car.
Your treehouse, though, Patrick, is a great summer project. So we'll tease the after show and talk about summer projects and things that we like to save for summer. A treehouse seems like to be one of those good summertime projects.
Well, I'm glad you remembered to mention the after show, Ian, because I forgot yesterday until I was reminded by Jeff at the very end of the show. But thanks. Yeah, summer projects. Awesome. This comes from Doug in Colorado. Hi, Ian. I just watched your interview with Dan Colbert. A lot of time was spent discussing dense pack cellulose. I've heard it discussed on the regular podcast, but never seen it done. What's the difference between that and wet-blown cellulose with a binder that's sprayed into stud cavities from the interior of the house? Do they both have the same performance? Thanks, Doug. Do they?
So I've only ever done dense pack, but I did reach out to some people that do the wet blown, and by the information I got, the performance is similar, and it seems to have a lot more to do with the type of equipment that the installer has and their methodology and comfort level with one versus the other.
I can tell you that damp spray looks way less expensive to me, because you don't have the very labor-intensive work of filling the individual stud cavities with the cellulose, which takes a long time.
And netting it, which also takes a long time. But you get to use that cool stapler that
with like a
staples.
2-foot-long magazine, right? Yeah.
I've done both damp spray and dense pack. I started doing it over 20 years ago on our custom builds. And it was just a couple years ago I tried doing the damp spray for the first time. A local career tech center bought the equipment, and it's basically the same blower. They just had a Crendel machine, and it's just a little
Spray nozzle. Yeah.
$300 nose piece
Hmm.
that we supply the water and compressed air. And we played around with it, and after dialing in the moisture content getting sprayed, we had a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds damp spraying, and of course they damp sprayed themselves and everything in the near vicinity, but but it worked really worked well. So either way, it doesn't the performance is, at least by the numbers that you read off of the installers guides, are all pretty much the same in that 3.5 to 3.7 R 3.5 to R7 3.7 per inch in thickness.
Do you guys have any worries about like putting wet stuff in your walls? I mean, that's always the like knee-jerk response I hear, right? Is like, why would you do that?
You do have to be now. I would not damp spray a double stud wall that's 12 or 14 inches thick. That's just going to be a recipe for a disaster. But if you're doing a 2x4, 2x6, or even 2x6 with maybe some furring over the top of that, so it's maybe up to 7 inches, you just have to give it time, and you can use a moisture meter to check when it's dried out. So depending on your speed of or anticipated speed of construction, it could delay you for a few days if it's dry weather. It could delay you for a week if it's a little bit more humid. But you can put into the building, you can put in dehumidifiers and draw the moisture out. So it's workable with the
So
damp.
it's not, would you say it's not a lot different than a house that gets rained on a lot during the framing stage in the amount of time you have to allow for it to dry out?
I think that's a good way to describe it. And what happens during the framing stage is all the wood that came kiln dried to the job site is all of a sudden soaked up of a bunch of moisture.
Right.
And after we get the roof on, the siding on, the doors and windows in, we want to let that dry out a bit on the inside so that you don't have that moisture getting encased behind the drywall and the vapor retarders that we put on.
I've seen this process. I photographed it for a Fine Homebuilding feature that I then sent to you, Ian. Did you take a look at that? Leroy Anthony's feature on damp spray cellulose?
I took just a quick look at it before I replied to Doug, but it's interesting that it seems like dense pack is what we talk about so much on here, but maybe it is because we're talking about it in the confines of a double stud wall.
Well, I think it's hard to find someone who does damp spray. I had to search far and wide to find the author of that Fine Homebuilding feature, and
Yeah.
I don't know why, because it seems to make so much sense. And when the job is finished, it looks beautiful. I mean, as far as the quality of insulation work, it is amazing how well it fits around stuff. Not surprising.
It could just be the misconception about the moisture content and what it does to your assembly.
Doug made mention of Mike Rowe doing a dirty jobs with a damp spray crew and describing it as indeed dirty, and that is what I would say too. It was very, very, very dusty in that space.
With the damp spray, it was dusty?
Oh yeah, there's particles everywhere.
Wow,
Yeah.
I did not find that. That could be the cellulose that they're getting, because you can buy different.
Well, it's also they
cellulose
take this
dust
big roller and they're like
Scrubbing.
grinding off the excess after they've built the cellulose layer up beyond the studs because they want to
Right.
adequately fill it. The other weird thing that happened to me. So cellulose insulators have RF controls on their blowing machines that turn them on and off. Right? They wear this little thing on their button on their belt, and they can speed up, slow down, or stop the machine. And it was playing havoc with my photography lighting kit. It was just like, and I didn't know what the heck to do. And so I finally figured out if I moved the controller away from his, rig, that I could take pictures. But oh my gosh, it was. Do you guys ever take?
How did
What's
you
that?
even figure out that there was that crossover? Because you could have just been I would have just thought, oh, my lighting equipment is just gone berserk, and it wouldn't have made the connection to the remote
Well,
controller.
I'd be lying if I didn't say it took a few minutes, Mike, to figure out what the heck was going on. Yeah. If you guys ever tried to take photos in a snowstorm, and light reflects off to the snowflakes, that's what was going on in this space. It was one of the more challenging locations I've ever had to deal with. Great feature, though. Chris from YouTube asked, he posted on our YouTube podcast feed, how do I get my contractor's license with actual proof of 2 years construction experience? Well, that's a good question. How do you?
Well, I was wondering, did Chris give any more information? Like, I have no
this is
experience,
YouTube, Mike.
or yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if he really has 2 years experience but can't prove it, or if he doesn't have 2 years experience and wants to get a contractor's license. Let's assume it's the former, because that seems more likely than the latter, right?
and which state? Because it makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
So I bumped. I won't say bumped up against it, but I was looking through, because I'm owning the house now in Arizona. I was looking at what it would take for me to get a contractor's license there, and it would require that I have proof of experience. So I think I can qualify for that. But
What
then
do
I
you
have
send him a stack of magazines for 20 some years?
I haven't. I'm not, I don't pull that card. You know, you find it. I find it's better not to do that. If I start saying, pull that out, then all of a sudden, they're, okay, we're going to test you, and then I get the real, yeah. But
We'll see what kind of expert you are. Yeah.
yeah, right. We'll see. But they have a requirement for taking courses and some exams. And then I look deeper because I'm thinking, yeah, I really don't want to go through all this because I'm just going to be bored out of my mind probably. So I read through the rules and regulations, and what I would say to Chris is look at what the rules and regulations are. There might be an opportunity or provision in the rules and regulations where you can apply for a waiver. And that's what I would do. You apply to the director of the licensing organization or the state and see if you can get a waiver for the 2-year experience based on, and you'll have to have something to base it on, either your experience or your knowledge base or something. And I was going to apply for the waiver of the exam and the classes if I was going to do it in Arizona.
Do you think Chris is going to get anywhere with his, building contractor's license board if he tells him he's been listening to the podcast for 2 years? Is that kind of the experience that is going to get him his license?
It's interesting what they would look for qualifications. If Chris has some knowledge of the building codes, and I have met an awful lot of I won't say advanced, but moderately qualified intermediate homeowners, DIYers, that are far more knowledgeable than builders who've been in the trade for 4 or 5 years. So the 2-year experience does not, in my mind, qualify anybody to get a contractor's license, if
and
that's all it is.
that's not enough anyway, in any measure, right? It's like that is, not enough, right?
So for Chris, I would look into, see what the rules and regulations are, look at the fine print and see if there's a workaround. And then talk to some, or just call the licensing authority and say, hey, this is my experience. This is, what other options are there for getting the license where I don't have to prove to you that I have 2 years experience. And then there's another little workaround, which is it's kind of on the level of fraud, but I don't know if we want to discuss it here.
Let's hear it.
But
Sounds like a good after show topic.
so if you have a friend who's a contractor in another state, then just have that person write you a note and say, yeah, I worked with Chris for a couple of years. He's got 2 years of experience.
I'm guessing that happens every day, right?
It does. It does.
I'm sure.
So. But it is fraud, and we should not promote it.
Well, and we also want people who are contractors to know what the heck they're doing more fundamentally, right? It's important for your sanity, your pocketbook, and your clients that you don't get in over your head.
Maybe a good topic for an after show would be the pitfalls and just talking about contractor licensing in different places, what it takes, what it doesn't take, and the wild west that we find that's out there, even in states that have a fairly stiff regulatory regime.
I just did a pro talk with a guy from Delaware named Joe Garvilla, who, on top of being an educator at a trade school and having his own construction business, and I don't even know if the guy's 30 years old yet, he's also starting a lobbying firm to lobby the state of Delaware so that they can get better licensing and better regulation of different building trades. And he's trying to come up with some way to license and regulate I would call them basement trades, carpentry, painting, masonry work, in the same respect that plumbing, HVAC, and electrical are regulated.
I'm writing this down as a after show topic because there are so many things to talk about. I want to talk about, not now, but why contractors recoil at the thought of licensing when it's meant to help protect them and ensure a level playing field. I don't understand that at all.
Yep.
But anyway, this is a topic for another conversation.
It does professionalize the industry. It can help to professionalize the industry.
Yep.
I want to read something that I found in the what? You were laughing because I was really writing that down. I have to. I got my little old school reporter's notebook here that's always by my side. I read this piece in the New York Times. I thought it was really interesting. I'm not going to read it all, but we've been talking about the air pollution caused by gas stoves intermittently on the show, largely because of the choices you guys were making about your cooking appliance, right, Ian? And
yeah, and I know the article that you're reading, and it, yeah.
Well, let me read it, and then I want your take on it, of course.
Yep.
Yeah. The title was "How Dirty Is That Gas Stove Really?" A team of scientists from Stanford recently embarked on testing a tour of New York City apartments to better understand the extent of gas stove pollution and how it flows from room to room in people's real homes. It's part of a 10-city study that is already showing how contaminants can quickly drift into living spaces, sometimes far beyond where the stoves are that created them. Concerns over the health and climate effects of gas-burning appliances have already prompted some cities and states to seek out, to phase out new connections. The 3-bedroom apartment they were visiting, the home of Tina Johnson, a mother of 3 adult children, overlooks elevated train tracks, has an eat-in kitchen filled with the aromas of herbs and spices that she uses to make her favorite dish, an American-style ratatouille. Mrs. Johnson had just cooked a breakfast of fried eggs and potatoes. "I'm glad you're here," she told researchers. A new stove had just been installed in her unit, but she still can't stand the smell of the gas from it, she said. She had volunteered to participate in the study through a local climate group. Mrs. Johnson said because she and her children have asthma and other health problems, she was eager to know what their stoves did to the air they breathed. The machinery quickly detected a change, a rise in concentrations of nitrogen dioxide, which among other negative health effects can irritate the respiratory system, aggravate symptoms of respiratory diseases, and contribute to asthma. Concentrations climbed to 500 parts per billion, 5 times the safety benchmark for a 1-hour exposure set by the EPA. Concentrations of benzene, also a human carcinogen, that's present in cigarette smoke and car emissions, also tripled. The next day, the team was back testing another location, this time an Airbnb apartment in central Harlem. The goal was to recreate a big family or dinner party scenario. In the course of about 40 minutes, levels of nitrogen dioxide topped 200 parts per billion in the living room, 300 parts per billion in the bedroom, and 400 parts per billion in the kitchen, or double, triple, and quadruple thresholds set by the EPA for 1-hour exposures. Benzene concentrations also tripled after the stove was turned on. "This stove had a hood," said Mr. Cashtan, one of the researchers, his hand in a stream of hot air that was blowing out from the hood's edge instead of venting outdoors. "This means the hood doesn't make much difference to the bad air," he said. So the hood wasn't collecting all the emissions from the stove. What do you guys think? It seems worrisome to me.
So if you read the article, One unit had no hood fan, one had a non-functioning hood fan,
Yeah.
and one had an undersized hood fan. And that's my issue with all of these pieces that I keep reading about gas stoves, is that they make no mention of proper ventilation. And when you think about cooking in general, Ben Bogey's talked about this on BS and Beer a few times, the act of cooking gives off chemicals of its own. So you can't just say, get rid of gas stoves, put in all electric ones, and everything's going to be fine. It's misrepresenting the problem in
So
likely
you
trying to
think a better
justify
message
getting
would
rid of
be,
gas.
if you're going to use a gas stove, make sure it's ventilated correctly and
If you're going to use
works.
a
Yeah.
stove, period, this is not about the gas stove in and of itself. This is about the lack of proper ventilation in homes. But some of this research is just, in my opinion, heavily skewed toward getting gas stoves and gas out of people's homes, which, you know, that in and of itself may be a good thing, but I think it's misrepresenting the true problem of lack of ventilation inside single family homes and apartment buildings.
Looks like you agree, Mike.
I agree 100%. I couldn't add anything to it. Yeah.
Well, I guess the show's over.
Cue the hate mail.
It gets to the point though, and this isn't just with cooking, but with the houses in general. What I see all the time, and I was at a open house training uh, Wednesday for at a passive house, and it's all about the ventilation. It's all about the ventilation. And if builders built to the code, you'd have adequate ventilation. Current code, like 2021, 2000, upcoming 24 code. And if inspectors actually inspected and tested to make sure that the ventilation equipment was working as it is required by code, then we really don't have a big problem with indoor air quality. But neither of those are happening. The builders aren't doing what they're supposed to do, and the inspectors, and I gotta give them a little leeway here. They don't have the equipment. They
No,
don't have
they're not trained to do
airflow,
this. Yeah.
and they don't have the gauges, and they don't have the time to do that test. This is a big, it's a big hole right now, and I know we're going to, in my state here in Rhode Island, we're going to be dealing with it over the next year with on the code side and how to make this work, because
I'm writing this down as another after show idea. The hole in ventilation show, right?
and it's so simple. It's there in the code. It says you do this and you're pretty much covered. But I have never tested a house that would meet that unless I built a house and I was testing along the way and made sure that balanced ventilation is what it comes down to.
We talk a lot about on the podcast and on GBA about houses as a system and needing to educate the end user and your client and how parts of the house need to be worked together as a system. And I think this is right in the bullseye of that. And just so much of what I read is missing that point.
And no matter, even if this is just a little sidebar to add to this, even when we design and when I put in really well-performing ventilation systems, a year or two later, I get a phone call from the owner and they're like, yeah, I'm having a problem with humidity in the house. And I go there and they fiddled with the dials, and they just, even though I train them, there's a big learning curve on the homeowner side. And it's one of those problems with the industry that they don't have a good self-correcting, self-automating, things that are on these systems, because it is taking a piece from here and a piece from there, and they're not really talking to each other.
Well, they do have systems like that. They're just horrifically expensive, and they cost about what a really nice German car costs by the time you put it in your home.
And that's why we see them in commercial construction. We don't really in residential. Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'd rather buy an expensive German car than a freaking ERV. If I could
You'd rather
say
buy
that.
one from the 50s or 60s that you could work on.
Well, I hope you all will stay tuned for the podcast after show where we're going to be talking about summer projects, a light topic with maybe some lemonade and iced tea. So I hope you'll stick around for that. And if you are an All Access member, I really appreciate it. Thanks for supporting the brand. If you're not, I hope you'll consider it because it helps us do the fine and important work of fine home building. And I appreciate that if you would consider it. Thanks, everybody. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Ian, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. That helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks very much for listening.